Hello, everyone. This will be our third and final part on Black history. Um, so, we will be looking at the post civil rights era, which goes from the 1980s to 2020. So, let's start with talking about MOVE, the Africa movement. MOVE was a black separatist movement that the Black Panthers had influenced. They believed in environmental activism, a return to Africa, and return to a hunter gatherer society. So you could see it is quite different from what the Black Panthers believed, but they were just inspired, but not directly related. They had a hostile relationship with the Philadelphia Police Department. In 1978, there was a shootout with the police that killed one officer and injured 15 more. MOVE and eyewitnesses all claim that the police were responsible for the deaths and injuries. The 1985 MOVE bombing. So let's look at the background. In 1981, MOVE relocated to a row house at 6221 Osage Avenue in Combs Creek area of West Philadelphia. Neighbors complained to the city for years about trash around their building, confrontations with neighbors, and bullhorn announcements of political messages by MOVE members. Police and mayor designated MOVE as a terrorist organization. Now let's get into the bombing. On May 13th, 1985, about 500 police officers surrounded the home. MOVE members were given 15 minutes to evacuate. At the end of those 15 minutes, the police began a shootout with house members. At 2 p.m., the police commissioner ordered the house to be bombed. After the bombing, the house allowed the house to burn, which allowed the fire to spread to 61 neighboring houses. The aftermath was 11 people were killed. Almost all but 2 people living in the MOVE house were killed, and 250 were left homeless. In 1998, Ramona Africa and survivors of victims who were awarded $1.5 million. In 2005, residents seeking damages for having been displaced by the widespread destruction from the bombing were awarded $12.83 million. In 2021, it was revealed that the bones of 2 children killed in the fire were being kept at a museum at UPenn. It was also discovered that the city had illegally destroyed the remains of many of the victims. What was left over was finally given back at that time. Next, we have Rodney King. On March 3rd, 1991, the police pulled over Rodney King and 2 friends. After a commotion, the police began beating, tasing, and pointing their guns at King and his friends. Nearby, George Holloway began filming the encounter. He later sent the video to KTLA News. This video became one of the first viral videos of police brutality. The aftermath of the Rodney King beating was the 5 police officers who beat him were arrested and put on trial. And it was the most talked about trial in LA. Next, we have the murder of Latasha Harlins. On March 16th, 1991, 9th grader Latasha Harlins was shot and killed by Korean store owner Soonjao Do. Do was convicted of voluntary manslaughter, and the jury recommended the maximum sentence of 16 years. But the judge, Joyce Carlin, decided against prison time and sentenced Do to 5 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, and a $500 fine instead. A state appeals court later unanimously upheld Judge Carlin's sentencing decision in April 1992. So, a week after the state appeals court upheld the due ruling, the police officers in the Rodney King trial were acquitted, found not guilty. That was April 29th, 1992. Within hours, rioting began in LA. Buildings were being set on fire, and the city made the bold decision not to help. Korean store owners, knowing the police and fire departments were not helping, decided to arm themselves and began shooting anyone they feared. The aftermath of the LA riots, 63 people had died. 2,383 people were injured. 12,111 people were arrested. 3,677 buildings were damaged. And there was about $1.5 billion in damages. We also saw the creation of community police accountability boards. But it wasn't enough. So we see ourselves in a situation of mass incarceration. From the 1980s to present, we've seen a significant increase in the prison population, which you can see from here is where the 80s are. So during the 80s, the Reagan administration started the war on drugs, which instituted mandatory minimums for drug offenses. Then in 1994, we have the Crime Bill, which was written by then Senator Joe Biden, our current president. It was passed by Congress and signed into law on September 13th, 1994. This bill is known as the Clinton Crime Bill. It included provisions for 100,000 police officers and $1.6 billion for new prisons. It also provided for a greatly expanded federal death penalty, new classes of individuals being banned from possessing firearms, and a variety of new crimes defined in statutes relating to hate crimes, sex crimes, and gang-related crime. Within about 30 years, or 40 years if we start from the 1980s, the U.S. has become the world's leader in imprisoning people, where 1 out of 5 prisoners in the world is incarcerated in the United States. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about police brutality and the social justice movement that came from it, which started with Trayvon Martin. A little bit different than other cases. On February 26, 2012, Trayvon Martin was walking home from a corner store with an iced tea and a bag of Skittles when George Zimmerman began following him. George Zimmerman shot and killed Martin, ignoring specific police commands not to follow the boy. Zimmerman was eventually acquitted, found not guilty, under the Florida Standard Ground Law. This law makes it legal for you to shoot someone who poses a threat to you if you say so. It was a threat. This case was very controversial because Trayvon Martin was only about 15 years old and he posed no threat, but still Zimmerman got off. Next, we have Philando Castile. He was a school cafeteria worker from the Minnesota area. He was driving home when pulled over by police. Castile informed the officer that he had a legally owned gun on him, and the police officer panicked and shot him. His girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, began live streaming immediately after Castile was shot on Facebook. This would be the first time people saw what happened live in the moment and on social media. During the almost 20-minute live stream, Reynolds' 4-year-old daughter says to her mom at one point, "Mom, please stop cussing and screaming, because I don't want you to get shooted." This live stream was seen 4 million times within 12 hours. I even saw it live when it happened. Next, we have George Floyd. On May 25th, 2020, police were called by a Cups Food grocery store employee who suspected that Floyd had used a counterfeit $20 bill. Floyd was murdered by Derek Chauvin, a white Minneapolis police officer who pressed his knee to Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. As seen in a witness's cell phone video, 2 other officers further restrained Floyd, and a 4th prevented onlookers from intervening as Floyd repeatedly pleaded that he could not breathe. Floyd's death sparked large protests across the world during the COVID-19 lockdowns. Chauvin was found guilty of murder on April 20th, 2021. Now we come to the Black Lives Matter movement. With the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, a boy who was just jogging, Breonna Taylor, a woman who was sleeping in her bed, and George Floyd, who we just talked about, we saw the beginning of the BLM movement. The BLM movement took place over the summer from May 26 to August 22nd, 2020. There were more than 7,750 Black Lives Matter linked demonstrations in over 2,240 locations throughout the United States. In addition to peaceful protests, we saw riots similar to what we saw in the LA riots, leading to a summer full of tension. The legacy of the BLM protests. Well, we began with a term that became famous during that time, called defund the police. This was a term, while it says defund the police, it's actually to dismantle and rebuild troubled police departments across the country. We saw police policy changes. Many states passed police accountability bills, such as Connecticut, which you can see here. And they banned chokeholds and other policies in the departments that would cause death. We also saw the removal of statutes towards controversial Confederate people, such as General Lee, which you could see here, and other historical people who caused death, and other such crimes, such as we saw the removal of many Christopher Columbus statues. And we saw long-standing brands such as Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's, and even the Washington Redskins football team, and many more drop names and imagery linked to racism. So that is all for this video. See you next time.